Okay, so we're dealing with progressivism and trying to get our hands around a very broad subject, trying to get our heads around it, as it were. In applying progressivism into teaching, I want to ask a couple questions to kind of get our hand on the subject, get our mind around the subject. If learning is child-centered, how do we know if the student is learning the right answers to the right questions, or how do we know what's going on inside of their minds? Well, we have to assess, we have to test. And if the particular lesson the child is learning comes from the child's own frame of reference, their own consciousness, then we don't really have a standardized method to test that unless the material we've started with is standardized. So every child is getting the same material. Well, that's not what progressivism is suggesting. That's not what Dewey is suggesting or propagating. Instead, they're propagating that it comes from within the child to ask the question and then to explore that in their own capacity, and then to show that they have mastered it in some way. Now, we can do that by an end product and outcome, and we can assess the outcome, but we don't have a standard that's universal or even general standard by which to assess by. So this is why Common Core has come in and become such a popular idea for a season of how to correct this problem. Because now we have a standard, right? We have standard-based education. This is the legacy of progressivism. There's always a new flavor of the month, a new way to teach, a new program that's going to save the day. The reason for that is because the philosophy is erred. It's in error, okay? Because it's using an empirical base of knowledge. And if you study Dewey and you read maybe his original dissertation, he's trying to look at the science of psychology and the philosophy of Immanuel Kant and put the two together. Doesn't do a really good job, but it's so complex that everybody kind of steps back and goes, oh my gosh. So in that process, we have got to understand the problem of progressivism in the educational system. Now, ideally, right, if everybody could be doing a PhD dissertation where they pose their own problem that has significance, and then they frame that problem into a question, and then they do a comprehensive lit review, and then they do an experiment to determine the answer to the question that they've proposed, and then they submit that to a peer of experts, and then they reflect on what they've learned from the experiment, and then they add to the knowledge base. Yes, I would agree with progressivism, but that can't happen for every student. I mean, it's just wrong thinking. Okay? I get a little hot on that. It's wrong thinking. Children need to learn the alphabet. Oh my. So the legacy of progressivism has been to place in the United States this continual idea of ongoing revision. We'll revise it. We'll make it better. What are you going to make better than the Bible? What are you going to make better, buddy? Right? So I went through this when I went my first graduate program in education, where I came across the cognitive dissonance. That's a big word, but it means when you have two philosophical systems that are not working with each other well. And I came across that in American political educational theory between two different federal legislations. that I was supposed to be implementing simultaneously in my practice. One was IDEA, which is for special ed needs and individuals, dealing with individual exceptionalities. And it comes from the civil rights movement in the 70s, and you'll learn about that. And then the No Child Left Behind, which the two had diametrically opposed philosophies. And I'm not going to get into that right now. But it was very frustrating as a teacher that I was being told to do two things that were mutually exclusive, effectively. So, classical Christian, and as we're purporting, Christian classical education says just calm down and get back to the classical material and get back to the basic pedagogical functions that a teacher should be able to function in, and equip the children, and give them something worthwhile in the process. Our next engagement, we're going to look at the classical Christian movement as a reaction to progressivism, and we'll be looking at the works of Doug Wilson as our primary focus of attention.